Hello, friends. Today we're going to be talking about loss and power in literature. And life is hard, and there have been a lot of times in my life where I've experienced loss, and I know that's true for you guys as well. And I've had to do a lot of work with my therapist regarding who has had the power in my life and who should have the power and what are optimal uses of power and how not to give your power away. But anyway, today we're going to take a look at the beginning of time, the thing you should never start a freshman research paper with. So, literary criticism, which I haven't talked a lot about in the very different courses that I've taught. This is not going to be boring, guys, I promise. This is like the quick and dirty, super fast summary of some literary criticism. Literary criticism has to do with the way in which you look at a piece of literature. C.S. Lewis, a really famous novelist, guy who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia from the last century, he was a big fan of reader response theory, which is when you look at a work of literature and you say, okay, what is this work saying to me? What's resonating with me? How do I make meaning out of what I'm reading? Definitely a valid way to look at literature. T.S. Eliot, another really important literary figure from the last century, he was into reader response. New critical theory, and he actually helped to develop it. And in new critical theory, that's all about what was the author intending, and do we understand what the author intended us for us to understand. There's several other different types of theories. There's feminist literary theory, LGBTQ literary theory, post-colonial literary theory, new historicism, so many different kinds of literary theory. There are all these different kinds of lenses through which you can look at a piece of literature. With my TCS students, when we were talking about Harry Potter movies, I was astonished to realize that my students were paying attention to the students in the Harry Potter movies, Harry and Hermione and Ron and all their friends. They were identifying with the students. But the Harry Potter books had come out when I was in college or after college. So in the movies, I was identifying with the professors, the adults. Although in the books, I did identify more with the students. But anyway, so that's a huge difference, right? If you're seeing a Harry Potter movie from the perspective of the professors versus from the perspective of the students. So, definitely some differences in who has the power and what they're doing with it, right? So, one kind of literary theory that can really help us maybe get a broad picture, specifically if we're looking at power, is Marxist literary theory. Now, Karl Marx had some issues. We're not a huge fan of Karl Marx. However, he likes to ask that question, who has the power and what are they doing with it? Which is a super important question to ask. Today we're going to take a look at the very beginning of the Hebrew Bible, and we're going to assume, for the purposes, I know not all of you will believe this, but for the purposes of analyzing this literature, we're going to assume that the literature is talking about the world being created by God in 6 literal days. And who has the power in this situation, and what are they doing with that power? And is it good? Is it bad? Is there someone being oppressed? I strongly suspect if you happen to grow up with any kind of a Western Christian background at all, chances are you've maybe never heard a minister take a look at a chapter from the Bible and say, all right, who has the power in this text? But why not? Like, what a great question to ask, right? So let's take a look. Now, first of all, I love John Milton and his epic poem Paradise Lost. I highly recommend it. So just to set the scene a little bit, to set the mood, I'm going to just read very quickly from a very short section of Paradise Lost. And John Milton, as the poet, is talking to his muse, which sounds a lot like wisdom or divine light or all of the above. Since God is light, and never but in unapproached light dwelt from eternity, dwelt then in thee, bright effluence of bright essence increate. Or hearest thou rather pure ethereal stream? Whose fountain? Who shall tell? Before the sun, before the heavens thou wert, and at the voice of God, as with a mantle didst thou invest the rising world of waters dark and deep, one from the void and formless, infinite. So, there are lots of ancient origin stories in lots of ancient literature. In the ancient Greek story, who has the power? I wish I had time to give you the whole story, but quick rundown is maybe chaos, maybe the abyss has the power. It's kind of impersonal. In the ancient Babylonian account of creation, these gods Apsu and Tiamat have the power, which doesn't go well for their eventual god children. In ancient India, you guys, I don't know how the ancient Indians survived. In ancient India, death and hunger have the power at creation. God bless the Indians. That's intense, right? In ancient China, these godlike figures Pan Gu and Nu Wa have the power, only centuries apart, and they don't have all the power, and the power they have is limited, and it's kind of interesting. It's very interesting, and I would definitely recommend looking up all these different origin stories and seeing what you find. But in the Genesis account, Genesis chapters 1 and 2, we have God, who at the very beginning, he's all that exists. And then he creates time, he creates matter, he creates the world, the waters, the light, the darkness, the sun, the moon, the plants, the animals, and then finally man. The apex, man and women, the apex of his creation. So God has the power, all the power, to begin with. He's the only one that actually exists to begin with. And what does he do with that power? He gives it away. He creates all these beautiful, incredible, marvelous things that he doesn't need to create. There's no need for him to create any of this. He creates it all, and then he says to the man and the woman, all right, now you get to be in charge of what I've created. Use it wisely. Do good things with it. And that's a huge responsibility, but how amazing is that? That God just immediately gives away power and is like, here, use it well, use it wisely. That's where the power is, in the very beginning of the Hebrew Bible. And that's what happens with it. And nobody is being oppressed by this power. And is there loss? Actually, no. There's no loss. No one loses anything in these first two chapters of Genesis. This is the first and only time there's like no loss whatsoever in the entire universe. Except Adam does lose a rib as God takes the rib out of him. Beyond that. But that's like a good loss, right? Then Eve is created from the rib. So then sometimes loss is good. Sometimes we lose things that are bad or that we don't need. So that's Genesis chapters 1 and 2, and power and loss.